Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I'm Jack Moline. I'm the president of Interfaith Alliance, and my special guest today is my friend and my colleague, Father Joseph Grieboski. We're glad to have you with us today, Joe. And I want to start by asking you the question I ask everybody at the beginning of these conversations. How are you doing?
Jack, we're doing as we're doing in these times.
Yeah, no kidding. You're safe, you're comfortable, you're healthy?
We are. As you know, my wife has a number of potentially debilitating illnesses. And so we locked down weeks before everybody else did. And what I've really appreciated about humanity in this time is that those people who know have stepped up courageously and impressively and said, what can we do? What can we do for her? What can we do for you? How can we make sure that she's safe, you're safe, and you guys don't need to go out? And, there is a silver lining to the terrible period we're in, that people are actually being really, really good in some ways.
It's a good time to have your faith affirmed in humanity. So.
Indeed.
And with all this going on, with your concern about your wife's health, with your health, what are you doing personally to maintain your focus on something other than the response to the pandemic?
Most of my work, much as yours, is interfaith related. It's human rights related. It's making sure that we still maintain the good that needs to be good. And what I've found is that people are now paying much more attention to the bad that exists in the world and how they can make it better. And what I've really appreciated is, people going, well, wait, the Rohingya in Burma are going through this, and yet with the pandemic, how do we help them? And the Uyghurs in China have been going through all this, but wait, with the pandemic, how do we fix that? And so people are now looking at things in a much different perspective, which is great and amazing and impressive. And so, the pandemic, and again, there's no good thing about the pandemic, but there is a silver lining where people are saying, wait, there's other people who are suffering and maybe I can help them. And I've been very grateful and impressed by where that worldview is going.
Well, that's great. That's terrific. And you mentioned your connection to a lot of these causes. You are the head and the founder of the Institute for Religion and Public Policy. Mm-hmm. What is it and what does it do?
So the Institute is a centerpiece for looking at where the world, religion, non-believers, anybody. It's the intersection between faith, non-faith, and government. Look at how people are treated. And so it's essentially, the Institute is essentially the world's, is an opportunity for the world to have a platform to say, I believe, I don't believe, we can talk. And by the way,
great motto.
Yeah, and by the way, we're going to fight together to protect each other's right to believe. And so it's built on the freedom, which, Jack, you know better than anybody, is religious freedom. It's about protecting the right of all people to believe or not believe according to the dictates of their hearts, their minds, and their consciences. Period.
So you're a self-effacing person, Joe. I know that you don't brag a lot, but I'm going to make you brag a little bit. You've interacted with some very interesting people in your work with the Institute. Start with a king and work your way down from there.
It has been my great honor to know the King of Morocco, and he is one of the world's great leaders when it comes to human rights. I was honored to know Pope John Paul, And there could be no better voice for human rights and religious freedom. Now, I'm going to get letters and emails on this statement, but he was. I mean,
No, he was.
But, you know, within the context of what he was a tremendous leader. There are good people in good places who try to do good things. And the best we can do is to support them, to enhance them, and let them be the better versions of themselves.
I don't know that I ever told you about my wife's encounter with the King of Morocco.
No.
He was, at the time, the Prince of Morocco. He was 16 years old. He came to the United States as a royal tourist.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I were tour guides at Universal Studios in Los Angeles.
I love it.
She gave him his tour of Universal Studios.
That's outstanding. I love it.
Yep. That was a long time ago. A long time ago.
Well, you know, the wonderful thing about the King of Morocco, first king to wear a wedding ring, first one to bring his wife out in public. And while none of this may seem important to the folks who are watching us, if you live in that context, his mom could have ridden a bus and no one would have known who she was. But this time the king said, no, this is my wife. She has a role. She's doing good things. His support and instigation of the marriage law that says, okay, the Quran says one thing about marriage, but you have to prove in court why you deserve more than one wife. I mean, what he's done for women's rights, what he's done for human rights, what he's done for religious freedom, it's really impressive, especially in the context of the Islamic world.
It's good that he has someone who is not sort of his publicity team making that point. It gives it more credibility. You know, when we got reacquainted not so long ago, I made a mistake of looking at you and figuring that you were a Roman Catholic priest. And then you began talking about your wife. And I put my foot straight down my throat by saying, when did they start letting priests get married? But you're not a Roman Catholic priest. Tell us about your Odyssey to that collar.
So that's a lovely way to put it. Thank you for putting it that way, that Odyssey. I was very Roman my entire life. As I said, I was very close with John Paul. I was trained by the Jesuits. I'm as Roman as you can get. But when I was younger, we all assumed Joe was going to be a priest. My mother wanted it, despite wanting grandchildren. My father, by the way, Jack, said to me one day, and I'll never forget this, we were in the car. My father says to me, you're bright, you can do whatever you want, just don't do two things. Don't join the military, don't become a priest. So I have 2 degrees in national security, and by the way, this. But I had always had a call. But there was no place for me in Rome when the rubber hit the road. And later in life, because I'm a lot older than most of your viewers, and I'm going to say this because you're my friend, I'm older than you. I'm not, but I'm just going to say it just to make you feel better. I found a place where I can have all of the callings. And so I found the old Catholic Church and was given a new family, a place that allowed me to express a ministry that has always been in my heart, and also do the other things that I'm good at and that I have history at. And so it's really been an interesting process, but I'm very grateful for the people who've helped me do that.
The Independent Old Catholic Church is a denomination of the Catholic Church that is separate from the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes. So Old Catholics, people don't understand what the concept of old Catholics are. They hear old Catholic and they think the Society of St. Peter Pius X,
Right.
where, oh, we only do the Latin Mass and it's all that. So there'd been a movement starting around the 12th century where there were two actually very strong politically theological elements in the church. It was Rome and it was Utrecht. And a process began where there was a beginning of separation. And so Rome took on a lot of power, a lot of influence, and they said, well, we decide. We're going to make the bishops. We're going to do this. And Utrecht was like, well, no, we're much more toward where the Orthodox are. We're very much by consensus. One person doesn't have the power. And when the First Vatican Council was being convened, the bishops of Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Denmark, they said, you know what? We're not in favor of papal infallibility. And so they all separated and created the Old Catholic Church. And while we're not Roman, we are still Catholic. And so we accept and believe and support all of the beliefs of the original 7 ecumenical councils, but we don't recognize the Pope's infallibility or his authority. And so while I love Francis and he's, a revolutionary, he's not our boss.
Mm-hmm. It hasn't stopped you, neither before you formally affiliated with this denomination, nor after. It hasn't stopped you from working with the Romans and with, I guess, 3 popes you've been connected with.
Sure.
We'll come back to that in a minute. I want to get to something that is, at least in your life, much more important and very important for our watchers and viewers watchers and listeners to hear about. You mentioned your wife's health challenges and the need that you had to quarantine before the rest of us did. We had a remarkable conversation about the availability of drugs that are proven treatments for her condition that were at one point being promoted as a treatment for coronavirus. Right. And it created a real dilemma, both a medical dilemma for you and an ethical dilemma for you. Talk about that a little bit.
My wife suffers from a number of potentially debilitating illnesses. And you know this, and I want your viewers to know this. If you ever saw my wife, you'd never know it.
Right.
She is always, and you've met her. She is nothing but brightness and brilliance and happiness and smiles. And
vibrancy is the word I would use.
Exactly. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, perfect. That's the perfect word, vibrancy. But she had to have surgery, brain surgery, to be able to deal with some of the issues that she's dealt with. And in the consequences of that, she had to be on pain meds. And so when everybody talked about the opioid crisis, the first thing we thought about was, well, how's this going to affect her? And so everybody's talking about, oh, fentanyl's bad, fentanyl's bad, fentanyl's bad. Well, it's not for those people who really need it.
Right.
And so for someone like her, she's the victim of a societal consequence. And so now when she needs to go to the hospital, not within the context of this, but I'll tell you a very quick story. She was having a terrible attack one day. And we went to, I will not mention the hospital or the doctor for legal reasons, but we went to a particular clinic, and the doctor said, well, you're just a drug addict and you want meds.
Oh, goodness. And
he did no exam. He didn't look at her. He was just like, well, you just want meds. And a few years later, the same hospital system, by the way, a neurologist who never researched her, never looked at her, said that her doctor, who, by the way, is from NIH, he's one of the 5 best neurologists in the world, the guy who looks at her says, he may have misdiagnosed you. And so, we've got such a dichotomy within the American medical system where you've got people who suffer serious and significant medical issues, but you just want to sign them off and move on to the next. And so what I appreciate about what my wife deals with is that she has faith, capacity, hope, and you said vibrancy. And when the worst comes to worst, she deals with it. But what bothers me is that the system doesn't let her get better. That the system is actually built against her.
It's important for us always to understand the difference between statistical models and individual lives.
Right.
And even in a statistic like in the opioid crisis or like our focus on so-called miracle drugs for the coronavirus, they're never 100% of the population.
Right.
And when you find yourself in that minority of the statistic, your need is just as real as if you were in the majority.
Exactly.
And that's I'm glad to have someone with a collar advocating for things like this. We're trying to get the board of directors of Interfaith Alliance together to do some necessary business. One of those things is electing you to our board. Why?
Terrible mistake, Jack. Terrible mistake.
With all the work that you're already doing with your own institute, with the many connections you have in the world, why is it important for you, as you've told me, to be a part of Interfaith Alliance?
Oh, that's easy. Interfaith Alliance is the one singular institution in the United States that speaks for everybody on a national level, whether they realize it or not. And what I love about what you and Interfaith Alliance do is speak for everybody. And so I have a very good friend whom you know, whose name I will not say because we're public, who is not a believer in any way. But he says there are 2 people in the world who get religion right, and it's Jack and Joe. And what Interfaith Alliance does is gets faith right. It's that what you do says it doesn't matter what the faith tradition is. Interfaith Alliance looks at the world in which we live and says, we are called from our tradition to do good and to do right. And Interfaith Alliance has always, in its 25-year history, has always said, this is what we do, and this is what we're going to do. And it stands by principle, and it stands to principle. And Interfaith Alliance's capacity to speak truth to power is undeniable.
Well, that's a great articulation, Joe, and it may get you not just on the board, but in an official position down the road.
Again, think this through, Jack. Think it through.
All right. One sort of, I won't call it salacious, but one sort of inside baseball question I'll ask you before we conclude. You had the dubious privilege to arrange an interfaith audience for Pope Benedict when he came to visit folks in the United States. A room full of chairs in the atrium public reception area of the John Paul Center next to the National Cathedral. So, which denomination was the most difficult?
Okay, so for the record, I didn't arrange it. I just want to make that clear. I didn't arrange it. But the inside the baseball is, who do you think the worst is going to be to deal with?
Oh, yeah, I know the answer to that already, and I'm
Yeah.
too embarrassed to tell you.
It's not yours.
Ah.
It's not mine. And it's not the Muslims.
Okay, that's close enough.
And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we don't want to antagonize the Jain population.
Yeah. Yes, because they're terrible to deal with. As are the Buddhists.
And
those terrible Buddhists.
So, Joe, before we go, I'm going to ask you what I try to ask at the end of every session, which is what one thing do you recommend to people viewing this at home, listening to this, to keep their spirits up, to keep them inspired and engaged during this time?
Let me put it this way. And I'm going to come from a very Christian worldview because, that's my thing. In Catholic masses, there's actually a second gospel. And the second gospel begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And we were with God. And to me, that's where we all need to be. And it doesn't matter your theological, religious, spiritual faith tradition. Yeah, this is pretty terrible. But we are all called to hope. Doesn't matter your faith. We're all called to hope. And it's not easy to find hope, but it's also worse to not look for it. And so know that there are people who love you, know that there are people who care for you, know that there are people who are there for you. And so if you're having those low moments, if you're having those difficult times, come for us because we're there. And I don't mean that for me, I don't mean that for you. I mean all of us. We're all there for one another. And that to me, I think is the greatest lesson from this pandemic. We are in this together, whether we like it or not. And so let's just go and be who we were called to be. And that's people of communion.
Father Joseph Grieboski, Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. To those of you who are viewing or listening from home, stay focused.